You're listening to the Let's Be Real podcast. Now, here's your host, Andy Hughes.
Our guest right now is the leader of an extremely customer-focused hospital in the state of Florida. He's the president and CEO of AdventHealth Fish Memorial Hospital. Let's welcome Rob Deininger to the Let's Be Real podcast. Rob, thank you so much for joining us. How are you?
I'm great, and thanks so much for having me on. Looking forward to the conversation today.
We really appreciate you coming on, and as I said, you're the president and the CEO of AdventHealth Fish Memorial Hospital. I would imagine that you were on quite a journey to get to this position as the president and CEO. Could you tell us a little bit about your journey to the position that you're in now?
Well, certainly. It is a bit of a journey, and it's an interesting one, different than a lot of my colleagues. But if we go back to college, I went to a liberal arts college up in Michigan. I took a 4-year degree in technology and discovered that I really loved flying. And so, as it turns out, I decided I wanted to be a commercial airline pilot. And so that's probably right off the gate where it starts out different, because I didn't start in healthcare. I actually started in aviation. So I spent then the next almost 13 years flying as a commercial airline pilot for a number of airlines, number of different aircraft, different parts of the country. Was able to see a lot of the world, see a lot of North, South, Central America, United States, and really enjoyed building up a career for what I thought was what I wanted to do, which was grow up and be an airline pilot and retire out of that profession. But life has an interesting way of changing as you get older and as things happen. And so in and around 2001, I was working for United Airlines as a pilot, and was based in the Washington, D.C. area. And all of you will remember September 11, 2001, those of you who are old enough anyways. And obviously the tragic events of that day kind of forever changed the aviation industry in a lot of ways. It created a lot of instability. There was a lot of folks quit flying for a number of months. We had several airlines go out of business, names that aren't with us today, like Eastern Airlines and America West and others, TWA, that aren't around anymore. But it really changed what the industry looked like after that. And so I ended up out of work for a number of months and spent that time trying to understand what the future might look like. I was lucky enough to be hired by Frontier Airlines, which was a young and growing airline based in Denver, Colorado, and was able to get hired on there in 2003-04. And it was a great experience. I'd been with them for a number of years, was flying the Airbus as a first officer, and as progressing up the ranks, picked up additional responsibility and skills, and then woke up one morning in 2006 to them filing for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. And so, was really faced with another major turning point where I was faced with the possibility of having to make another career change. Those of you that don't know the airline industry, it's a heavily unionized industry, which means that pretty much everything in your life is governed by the seniority list. And so that's, where you are, and seniority determines your pay, your benefits, your schedule, so pretty much everything to do with your quality of life. And so having been at United for some time and then starting over at Frontier, was going all the way back to the bottom pay, bottom benefits, and then having worked my way up at Frontier, and then facing the possibility of having to potentially start over again as they went through the bankruptcy reorganization process was another challenge. And so it was at that point where I started to seriously look around to what other industries were out there that I could potentially take my skills and be useful in. Is that tracking so far with you, Andy?
It absolutely is, and that's really interesting, an awesome journey for sure. And I want to actually go back to the commercial airline pilot because I think that's a really
Certainly.
cool thing that you did. What was that experience like? You mentioned September 11th, 2001. Obviously, that changed the industry. One of the things that we talk about here is alignment, and that's what the A in the real stands for. And I would have to imagine that you really have to be aligned when you're a pilot.
Oh, absolutely. It's it's a fascinating career. I don't regret a minute of my time in the airline industry, and my time as a pilot. You really are, at least from a pilot's perspective, you're all in on the career that you're with. There's a lot of responsibility. There's a ton of training, a ton of education. Obviously, high stakes, high price for safety and reliability, and so it's absolutely it's an exciting industry to be a part of, and I really enjoyed being on the, I guess I would call it the customer-facing side, where I was in commercial passenger aviation as well, because it was a good balance for me.
Yeah, and you mentioned the training. What was the training like? I'm sure that there was a lot of training that had to go into that because, if a situation occurred where there was an emergency or something went wrong, you really have to know what to do in that moment.
Yeah, certainly. Commercial aviation is one of the safest, if not the safest, industries out there, and it is such because of the level of training that goes into each of the crew members' roles. I've not been around an industry that does more emergency preparedness training. Every pilot spends significant amount of time in simulators. These are simulators not like a desktop video game, but full motion simulators that can replicate essentially everything that the airplane is capable of doing. As a captain, you go every 6 months and you practice, everything from engine fires to engine failures, evacuations. You practice any number of things that are impossible to replicate in the airplane, so that when they do happen, you're completely prepared for them. And you do that as every crew member, flight attendants, pilots, all go through some level of continuous training where there's a set schedule where they're back in for recurrent training. And that really, I do think, is a huge reason why the industry is as safe as it is. And other industries, including healthcare, have sought to become more like aviation in their level of safety and training, and have some work to do. But I've not seen an industry that spends the amount of time and resources on recurrent and safety training.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. And you mentioned earlier that a lot of people stopped flying, and I feel like there may be some people still out there that are still a little bit afraid of getting on a plane. But as you said, I feel like it's probably the safest that it's ever been now.
I think it is. I mean, you have to look up some of the statistics on the amount of people who are flying, but I think we're a more connected world, more connected than we've ever been, and aviation plays a huge part of that. There's millions and millions of people every year who travel by air, and you're far more likely to have an accident in your car, walking your dog, being hit by lightning than you ever are of having something negative happen to you in an airplane. But I think for a lot of people, it's a lack of control and a lack of understanding that contributes to their fear. Flying is something most people don't really understand the physics of it. They don't understand how it happens, and so you're combine that with the fact that you're in the air at 40,000 feet with 180 people you don't know, going incredibly fast and sometimes in bad weather, and I think it's that lack of control, I think, that drives a lot of people's fear.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, I want to actually move away from that now and talk about your journey into the healthcare industry. And I think it's interesting because when you think about healthcare and airline industries, people may not loop those together or they may not seem similar, but when you think about it a little bit more in depth, both are considered services that are made for the people, where, in the healthcare industry, you're trying to improve their health, whatever that means, whether it's surgery or mental health, physical health, whatever it is. But in an airline, yes, you're trying to get the person from point A to point B, but you're also doing a lot of things for the customer, and also, just making sure that they have a great experience. Could you talk a little bit about the similarities between those two industries?
Certainly, as you said, on the surface, they don't appear to be all that similar. But when you start to go deeper into them, there are some strong similarities. Both are highly regulated industries. There's a lot of regulation and oversight to them both. There is an extremely high price paid on safety for both industries, and so that price on safety means that there's a lot of work that goes into delivering the safe product. And then they both have an incredible value placed on the consumer experience as part of it. Airlines compete daily over the experience you have on their airplanes while you fly. Do you get there on time? Do you get good? Do you have a comfortable seat? Does your bag arrive with you? The sort of how are the flight attendants and their interactions with you? Is this a pleasant experience? Healthcare is a lot the same. We place an incredibly high price on your experience with us. I think most people take for granted. I think they believe that at least in the United States we have great health care. And so in some ways in the United States, the safety of care is something people take for granted at hospitals. Mm-hmm. And so what they're actually measuring us against is the experience of their care when they come to a hospital. And so how are they feeling humanized, and how are they feeling loved and a part of the conversation, and what's the communication like, and do they understand what's going on? These are all things that are part of their consumer experience that are very similar to the airline industry. Most people don't go travel on an airplane and worry about whether they're going to get to their destination. I think they take for granted that it's a safe environment. So what they're buying their ticket on is based on price, or it's based on loyalty to a brand, or it's based on comforts or various things.
Mm-hmm. No, that's really interesting. And as a CEO and president, obviously you've had a lot of different roles and you've been able to advance your career to a CEO and president. What were some of the things that you did to stand out to develop your career?
Well, when I first started in healthcare, I transitioned into a role in performance improvement. I had, during my time in the airlines, done some work in Six Sigma and Lean, and had some experience in that. And there was a real desire in healthcare at the time to bring some of the airline thinking and process methodology into the healthcare environment. And so I started on a team of performance improvement consultants, basically, that worked for our health system. And that was a great opportunity for me to learn healthcare kind of on the ground floor and work with a lot of really diverse teams. I worked in transportation and lab, pharmacy, imaging, nursing units, really working with those teams and those leaders, understanding their challenges and ways that maybe some PI thought process and methodology could help solve some of their problems. And so that was an opportunity for me to really build my relational skills and help work with leaders, because as a PI leader, you don't run these units, these business units don't report to you, so you're sort of leading through influence, and you're trying to help people reach a consensus to work on a solution that is really nothing that I can implement myself. It really has to be owned by them. And I think there's a lot of qualities in that have kind of stayed with me as I've grown in leadership roles. I tend to be the type of leader that encourages people to find their own solutions, and let me be someone who moves barriers out of the way and maybe opens doors to where some of the doors are closed. but really empowers them to try to make their own decisions and kind of own their work, and not do it for them. Mm-hmm. The other thing, probably one of the turning points in my leadership career was while working in performance improvement. I was contacted by a senior executive with the opportunity to work on what at the time seemed like a thankless project with the Malcolm Baldrige Award. And essentially the work was, I need you to come work for me and help me, or come spend time with me, help me rewrite our application. Very tedious work, a lot of hours with a computer and writing an application to send in on behalf of our organization. And I was one of only 2 people on our team that said yes to the opportunity. And the next 6 or 8 months that I spent working on that process was transformative in that I got to learn a lot of our organization that at the very senior level, as I work with executives to help understand their thought process and how we were going to articulate things that we did in the organization into an application. It was really that exposure and the work that happened there that then led me to be offered my first director position over a research institute. And so, one of the things I tell people today is that, be someone who starts with yes and then goes and figures it out. There's too many people today who when approached with an opportunity instantly think of all the reasons why it can't be successful. Mm-hmm. But be the kind of person who's biased to say, yeah, that sounds great, let's do it, and then figures out how to get it done.
I love that. I love the fact that you kind of take that attitude, is just say yes and see where it goes. And I think that's a good way to do it because it allows you to maybe explore new things that you never have, and it helps you learn. And the more things you learn, the better you're going to be. You can never learn too much. So I think that's a really cool thing that you did. Now, another thing that I'd like to ask you as a CEO and as a president, what are some qualities that you look for in a good leader?
There's a lot of qualities. I think one of the qualities I look for is that yes first attitude. Since we just kind of touched on that, that's clearly one of them that I look for. I look for someone that has a insatiable desire to learn as well, because I really think that, especially in healthcare is for always changing. Every month it feels like we've had some change to the industry, some new challenge to tackle. Other industries are similar to this as well. And so I think the best leaders are ones that have this quest for knowledge and this desire to continuously learn and not sit back and assume that you've learned it all. A third quality would be someone who has their priorities sorted. And I'm blessed to work in an organization that places a high value on faith and family and balance from a priority standpoint. And so I look for leaders who understand who they are, understand what role faith plays in their life, what role their family plays in their life, and what role work plays in their life, and has sorted the order that those things are important to them, because it has a tremendous ability to determine how successful you can be as a leader if you've figured out your priorities.
That's great, and I actually do want to dive into the current organization that you're in. You talked about faith. How important is it for you, as well as the hospital overall, to give back to the community? Because I've heard a lot about the efforts that you guys do, and you guys do some tremendous work. How important is that to give back to the community that you're a part of down there in Florida?
Well, certainly. AdventHealth, we're a overtly faith-based Christian organization, and we really do view each of our hospital facilities as parts of our communities. With a few exceptions, we have some very large facilities. The majority of our facilities would be considered medium-sized hospitals. They're somewhere between 120 and 190 beds, medium-sized facilities. The majority, Fish Memorial is one of those. They are in communities that are moderately sized, and in most cases, our hospitals are the single largest employer in the town that they're in. And so we very much are a key part of our communities. And so we embrace that opportunity to be involved in all kinds of things that have in some ways nothing to do with healthcare, but have everything to do with the fact that I employ 1,000 employees at this hospital, and most of them live and work within 10 miles of the facility. And so we're very much a part of the communities, and we take steps to partner with everything from Boys and Girls Clubs to Rotary Clubs to, various charities as ways to make sure that, with a mission to extend the healing ministry of Christ, that we have a way to begin to help that trickle down into our community as well, so that they feel like we're not just a business, but we're a part of their community. And so we are tremendously involved. It's one of the things I love about working for this organization is that it's so easy for us to jump in and partner in the community, because almost everyone on my team is involved in some charity or some organization because they understand how important it is to us.
Yeah, that's amazing. And with that community service and treating people the right way at the hospital, I have to imagine that something in your business that is critical is empathy, and that's something that we talk a lot about on this podcast. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of empathy in your industry?
Oh, absolutely. I don't think you can be successful ultimately in healthcare if you don't have a team that understands empathy. And there's a lot of study out there on the difference between sympathy and empathy, and that empathy is a much deeper understanding of people. And we have service standards at the facility, and our service standards as a company are love me, keep me safe, make it easy, and own it. And we really believe that if we can do those four things, that is kind of how we show empathy, because it's touching all sides of a person. It's helping them feel sort of a mind, body, spirit approach to healthcare. And we, how do we connect with people in the hospital, and how do you create that human connection, that empathy, in a moment where they are almost solely focused either on their own pain or their family is focused on their sick loved one? And how do we stop just being caregivers? How are we not just a nurse in the room, a doctor in the room, but how are we having an interaction that is human being to human being? It's person to person. And we spend a lot of time working with our teams and helping them understand the importance of that. And I could talk a long time about the power of empathy and the role that it plays in the healing process. People who are loved and are cared for heal faster, and there's a ton of science that supports that, and it's an interesting role that we can see ourselves in as healthcare providers, in that we're not always providing healthcare as part of the healing process. It's recognizing that things like companionship and friendship and conversation are also part of the healing process that people need.
Yeah, that's very interesting and fascinating. And now I'd actually like to just move to a quick lightning round just to kind of sum up your career. Do you have any resources that you recommend? Do you read any books, anything like that really changed your outlook on leadership or anything like that?
I read a lot. I have some great authors that are out there. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and his work. Brene Brown, she does some fascinating thoughts. There's a great book that I've read several times called The Power of Story by Jim Loehr, that really talks about how you can captivate people through the powers of story. And I think as leaders, that's something that our teams resonate with. What else? Some great Made to Stick, Chip Heath, I think, and his brother Dan, about habits and how do we create meaningful stickiness at work when it comes to the things that we try to do. There's so many good business books, but like I said earlier, I try to read a lot, and I try not to focus as much on, I guess, the daily, weekly, monthly journals, because they tend to shift their focus too often, to sort of the topic of the month or the topic of the week. And so I try to read more people who are thought leaders in a space, and try to take what they have discovered and figure out how I can apply it to my life.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely have to check some of those out. And to all the listeners out there, definitely check those out as well. Now, as the president and the CEO, what are some of your greatest accomplishments in your career so far?
Oh boy, I had one really fun accomplishment. I said yes to a role as to lead a research institute. I knew nothing about research, and I was asked to help design, build an institute, hire 100 staff, recruit scientists to study diabetes and obesity in Orlando, Florida. And, I said yes to that, and that institute today has 120 staff, like a dozen scientists, and I think they're up to $6 or $7 million a year of NIH funding, and another $5 or $6 million of industry funding. And so, it's been fun to watch that institute that I kind of helped start up from the ground floor, really flourishing in Central Florida, doing a really powerful research in a space that has so much need. So a lot of satisfaction in that, and then just I get a lot of satisfaction about people who've worked with me, and who I've had a chance to work alongside and mentor and coach a little bit, go on and do great things. And so I enjoy watching other people's success as well, people who I've had a chance to work with.
Yeah, that has to be really rewarding with both, that program and the people that have worked with you. That has to be just really rewarding for you. So I could definitely understand that being a great accomplishment. Now, on the flip side of that, did you ever have a time where, maybe you had a huge challenge, and how did you overcome that to, just get past all that adversity?
Well, I tell people all the time, I have a hard time dwelling on the negative. It's kind of in my wiring, and so I don't remember all of those things as well. But one of the biggest challenges I had was extremely early on in my adult career, back when I was still working on being a pilot, and I went and sat for my very first test, which was my commercial pilot's license. And I failed it. And there had been months and months of preparation, and I was ready to go, and I went in, and it just felt like nothing went right. And I came out of the flight portion, and the examiner sat down and said, "I can't pass you." And I felt like at that point I was like, "Oh no, what am I going to do? This is what I want to do. This is the career I want to be in." And I was still in college, well, just out of college at the time, and so I spent probably 3 days thinking about it and praying about it, and decided that I need to do this again. And on one hand, it's as simple as you retake the test and you pass. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, there was a bit of a reputation in the industry that people didn't like to hire people who had failed a test. The expectation was you would just pass them all. So I went back about a week and a half later and passed it. And there was a few times over the course of my flying career that I was asked about, so what happened on this, with this one test that you didn't pass? And I was able to, I think, turn that into a bit of a strength for me by talking confidently about the things that I had done well and the things that I had not done well, and what I had learned from the experience. Mm-hmm. And that the experience and the feeling that I had when I had failed that test was a feeling I didn't want to experience again. And so that motivated me to study and learn and continue to focus on how to not have that feeling again. And so I was able to kind of turn that into a motivator.
Wow, yeah, that's a very fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that. But I think that does come back to your attitude because, maybe there were some people, maybe they were too embarrassed to even go back and take the test, but you used it as a learning moment. You didn't take it as, something that was killing your dreams. You did whatever it took to get to that point and you were able to pass it. So that type of attitude was critical in that moment. Well, Rob, this was so much fun. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. This was a really cool interview. I had a lot of fun with it, and best of luck with everything at the hospital. We really appreciate all that you do, and again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. It was a pleasure talking with you today, and I hope the listeners enjoy it.